Well, how interesting. It appears some of you actually possess the rare quality of discernment. I am Professor Severus Snape Potion's master at Hogwarts, head of Slytherin House, and quite possibly the only person willing to tell you the unvarnished truth. Consider yourselves privileged. Not everyone is worthy of the insights I am prepared to share. But you few have demonstrated that you may be capable of something approaching actual thought. And if you have something to say to me, you may leave a comment below. Try not to disappoint me more than absolutely necessary. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived But Mrs. Dursley, of number 4 Privet Drive, were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. A tedious proclamation, as if mediocrity were an achievement. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. By ignorance, willfully cultivated. How like Petunia. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills, muggle drudgery, appropriate. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. A walrus in a suit. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. Her sister's elegance was wasted on this bloodline. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. A spoiled, bellowing piglet. Evidently, standards are low on Privet Drive. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. The shame of association. Pathetic. They didn't think they could bear it. If anyone found out about the Potters, Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. Jealousy. Petunia always despised what she couldn't possess. Lily's magic, Lily's grace. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The horror of being interesting. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son, too, but they had never even seen him. Ignorance is bliss. Apparently, this boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that, as if the Potter spawn would lower himself. The arrogance. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the doll. Grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. The calm before, the storm. How poetic or tedious. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work. A Herculean effort, no doubt. And Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled the screaming Dudley into his high chair. A symphony of domestic bliss, revolting. None of them noticed a large, tawny owl flutter past the window. Blissful oblivion. How they'd squawk if they knew. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Charming little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. Minerva, never one for subtlety when perched on a wall, suits her. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Denial. The first refuge of the willfully blind. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. Her stare could curdle milk. Effective. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. The limitations of the Muggle mind. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. Pinnacle of his aspirations. Drills. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks, idiots, celebrating in broad daylight. Does discretion mean nothing? Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. If only it were that simple. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together, gossiping like fishwives. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't Gill at all. Why? That man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him. The sheer audacity of existing while magical. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. Collecting evidence of their own stupidity, perhaps. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on drills. Safe in his bubble of banality, Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead, like children at a fireworks display. Pathetic. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. Ignorance is indeed bliss. He yelled at 5 different people. A productive morning by his standards. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch, piss legs, and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. The highlight of his day, thrilling. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. Good, let him squirm. This bunch were whispering excitedly, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters. That's right. That's what I heard, yes. Their son, Harry Fools. Broadcasting it in the street. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. Ah, the name registers. How delightful. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his moustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. Desperate rationalization, almost amusing. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. Harold Potter. The mind boggles. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. The sister she envied and despised. A familiar dynamic. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister like that. A sister like Lily. The thought is obscene. But all the same, those people in cloaks, lingering dread. Excellent. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, poor dear. The horror. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. Another one, subtle as a butcher. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passers-by stare, "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even mug like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day. Celebrating while Lily lies cold. The very air tastes of Ashdod." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Physical contact with a muggle. How festive. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. A useful term. Accurate in his case. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off for home, hoping he was imagining things which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. Tragic flaw. Imagination might have saved him from this crushing normality as he pulled into the driveway of number 4. The first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. Persistent, isn't she? Shoo, said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. I imagine Minerva's stare could wither. Devil's snare. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Cowardice. How predictable. Mrs. Dursley had had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Nextdoor's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word. A towering intellect. That boy. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. Idiots, the lot of them. Owls carrying the news, Lily is dead. Let them gawk. The newscaster allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that. But it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks. But I can promise a wet night tonight. Shooting stars. Daedalus Diggle, no doubt. Sentimentality made visible. Disgusting. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain. Owls flying by daylight. Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place. And a whisper about the Potters. The pieces click together. Too late, Muggle, far too late. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? The question that shatters their fragile normalcy. As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. The sister who outshone her in every way. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny. Bad stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls shooting stars. And there were a lot of funny-looking people in town today. Funny-looking. A quaint term for wizards celebrating your nephew's survival and your sister's murder. So, snapped Mrs. Dursley, defensive. Always. Well, just thought, maybe, It was something to do with, you know, her crowd. Her crowd, the magical world Petunia coveted and loathed. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he'd heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said, as casually as he could, there. Son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? The boy, Lily's son, James's spawn. Alive. The thought is a physical blow. I suppose so, said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. Admitting the connection is agony. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Howard, as if he could be anything so mundane. Harry, nasty, common name, if you ask me. Jealousy, distilled. Lily chose it. That's reason enough for Petunia to hate it. Oh, yes, said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. Agreeing with Petunia, his survival strategy. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though it were waiting for something. Peas for him. The old fool. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. The shame, the delicious, inevitable shame that Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well what Petunia thought about them and their kind. ... He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. ... Oh, but it will, Muggle. It will. How very wrong he was. Blissfully, catastrophically wrong. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. Minerva's patience is legendary and irritating. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed on the next street, nor when two owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. Midnight. Fitting. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently you'd have thought he'd just popped out of the ground. Showman. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Disapproval. Understandable. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. Understatement. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots, garish even for him. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore, the architect of burdens. Mine. And now, it seems, the boys. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. Or he simply didn't care. Likely the latter. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. Probably a sherbet lemon, or a world-altering plan. But he did seem to realize he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. Everything amuses him, especially other people's discomfort. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." Indeed, Minerva is reliably punctual with her disapproval. He found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter, the Deluminator, a toy for the great wizard. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness, plunging muggles into darkness. How symbolic. 12 times he clicked the protouter, until the only lights left on the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. Her eyes, glaring from the dark by. If anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Convenient and typical. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his cloak and set off, down the street toward number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." Casual, as if meeting on a park bench. He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman, who was wearing square glasses, exactly the shape of the markings the cat had had around its eyes. Severe. A fair assessment. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. Sitting on a wall all day will do that. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. A pointless question. Her animagus form is as rigid as her posture. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly, accurate, and amusing. You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall." "All day," said Professor McGonagall. A valid point. One she clearly relishes making. All day. When you could have been celebrating. I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here. Celebrating. The word grates. Lily is dead. What is there to celebrate? The boy's survival. A fluke. A curse. Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. Her sentiments exactly. "Oh yes, everyone's celebrating, all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful. But no, even the muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news." She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. "I heard it. Flocks of owls. Shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet that was Daedalus Diggle. He never had much sense. None of them do. Reveling while the Dark Lord's shadow still lingers. Fools. You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "Can't I? We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. 11 years of fear, ended tonight. At what cost?" "Lily, I know that," said Professor McGonagall irritably. "But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless, out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle clothes, swapping rumors. The truth is terrible enough." She threw a sharp, sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't, so she went on. "She wants confirmation of the worst. A fine thing it would be, on the very day you know who seems to have disappeared at last." The Muggles found out about us all. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore. Gone, or merely diminished. It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. Seems, not knows. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop? Lemon drops, while the world burns. Typical, what? Baffled, as expected. A lemon drop. They're a kind of Muggle sweet. I'm rather fond of his little eccentricities. Maddening. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, though she didn't think this was the moment for lemon drops. Quite right, as I say, even if you know who has gone. The name sticks in her throat. Fear is a habit. My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense for 11 years. I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. The name echoes in the quiet street. Powerful, dangerous, necessary. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking to lemon drops, seemed not to notice. He notices everything. He simply chooses not to acknowledge it. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying, you know who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. Brave words, or foolish ones. I know you haven. Said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. Admiration. His due, I suppose. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know. All right, Voldemort was frightened of fear, the only language that monster understood. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. False modesty. He knows his power. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Dark powers. Unnatural. The thought coils like venom, only because you're too, well, noble to use them. Noble. A cage of his own making. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Deflecting with whimsy. Predictable. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, The owls are nothing next to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying, about why he's disappeared, about what finally stopped him. The question hangs heavy. The boy, Lily's boy. It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason she had been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day. For neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another lemon drop and did not answer, playing for time or savoring the moment. What they're saying, she pressed on, impatient. Get to it, Minerva. Is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter are, that they're dead. The words fall like stones. Lily, dead. James, too. Good. But Lily is gone. The world dims. Dumbledore bowed his head. Confirmation, the finality of it. Professor McGonagall gasped. Shock, grief. Lily and James. I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, Albus, Dumbledore. Her voice cracks. Even Minerva feels it. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. He knows. He always knows. Did he know it would happen? Did I? Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power somehow broke, and that's why he's gone. The boy lived. Lily died, but the boy lived. Why? How? A fluke. A mother's sacrifice. Meaningless. She is still gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. Glumly, an understatement. The weight of the world rests there. It's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding. Of all the things to stop him. But how, in the name of heaven, did Harry survive? How, indeed? Luck, fate, or something deeper, darker? The boy, James's son, Lily's eyes. They say, a living ghost. We can only guess, said Dumbledore. Liar. He has theories. He always does. We may never know. Convenient. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Sentiment. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands, by no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. A celestial clock. How pretentious. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way. Changing the subject to the oaf. Yes, said Professor McGonagall, composed. Again. Good. And I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places. The heart of Muggle tedium. I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now. No, the words are a physical jolt. Petunia. He would leave Lily's child with Petunia. You don't mean, you can't mean. The people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Exactly. The sheer idiocy. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come and live here. Precisely, Minerva. Voice reason. Stop this madness. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. Firmly, unyielding. As always. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter to Petunia, explaining magic, explaining her sister's murder. The absurdity is breathtaking. A letter, repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore? You think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous. A legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Famous for surviving, for being the reason. Lily is dead. The boy will drown in that fame, or be poisoned by it, like his father. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very seriously over the top of his half-moon glasses. It would be enough to turn any boy's head, famous before he can walk, and talk, famous for something he won't even remember. Can you see how much better off he'll be, growing up away from all that until he's ready to take it? The point, the only point. Let him be anonymous. Let him be normal, unlike his parents. Away from the whispers, the stares, the weight of being. The boy who lived away from me. Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed, and then said, Yes, you're right, of course. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it. A ridiculous image. Hagrid's bringing him the oaf. Of course, you think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this. Wise? No. Necessary. Perhaps Hagrid is loyal, blundering, but loyal. I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. A high compliment. Unearned, in my opinion. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly. But you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to. What was that? Careless. A kind word for it. A low, rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up at the sky, and a huge motorcycle fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. Black's motorcycle. Flaunting secrecy. Typical. If the motorcycle was huge, it was nothing to the man sitting astride it. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. A mountain in a moleskin coat. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of trash-can lids, and his feet in their leather boots were like baby dolphins. A graceless giant. In his vast, muscular arms, he was holding a bundle of blankets. The bundle, Lily's son. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. Relieve the oath around, or that the child is intact, at last. And where did you get that motorcycle? Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir, said the giant, climbing carefully off the motorcycle as he spoke. Young Sirius Black lent it. Me. I've got him, sir. Black. Involved. Of course. Potter's shadow. No problems, were there? Problems. In Godric's Hollow. The place is rubble. No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out all right before the muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we was flying over Bristol. Asleep. Oblivious. While his world ended, Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy, fast asleep, small, fragile, unremarkable. Under a tuft of jet-black hair over his forehead, they could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. The scar, the mark of the killing curse that failed, the brand of his survival. Lily's death made visible. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Where the curse struck. where Lily's protection held. Yes, said Dumbledore, he'll have that scar forever. A constant reminder. For him, for me. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Remove the scar. Why? It tells a story. A story the boy will need to know. Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in handy. I have one myself above my left knee that is a perfect map of the London Underground. Well, give him here, Hagrid. We'd better get this over with. Whimsy, again, deflecting from the gravity, handing Lily's child to Petunia. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned toward the Dursleys' house. The walk of shame for the child. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid, sentimental fool. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Revolting. Then, suddenly, Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Blubbering. She hissed Professor McGonagall, "You'll wake the Muggles, and the child, and the neighborhood." Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large, spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. "But I Sacy can't stand it. Lily and James. Dead, and poor little Harry off live with Muggles. Poor little Harry, condemned to Privet Drive. Perhaps we should both weep. Yes, it's all very sad. But get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found." Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm, as if comforting a volatile irrumpent. As Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door, he laid Harry gently on the doorstep on the cold stone. Like unwanted milk, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets. Explanations for Petunia. Worthless parchment. And then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Lily's son, James's legacy. The child who lived, my burden. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out, extinguished, like the street lamps, like Lily's life. "Well," said Dumbledore finally, "that's that. We've no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations." Celebrations, while Lily's child lies on a doorstep. The hypocrisy chokes. "Yeah," said Hagrid, in a very muffled voice. "I'll be talking serious, his bike. Back. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir." Taking the bike back. A simple task for a simple man. Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorcycle and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night, gone, leaving only silence. "I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall," said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply, a dignified response. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner he stopped and took out the silver. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps, so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange light, returning to Muggle oblivion. And he could make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. The boy, alone. "Good luck, Harry," he murmured. Luck. He'll need more than luck with Petunia. He turned on his heel, and with a swish of his cloak, he was gone, leaving the mess behind, as usual. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. And yet, here he lies, the most astonishing thing of all. Harry Potter rolled over, inside his blankets, without waking up, sleeping, ignorant. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, clutching his fate. And he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. A grim future, but perhaps safer than the alternative. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived, to the boy who lived while his mother died." A hollow toast. Let them celebrate their savior. I will mourn, Lily, and watch. Always watch. Well, I suppose that concludes today's single quotes. First, you may like this video, assuming you possess the basic motor skills required to locate the button, though I suspect many of you will struggle even with this simple task. Second, if you found this content even marginally less disappointing than the usual dreck that passes for education on this site, you are encouraged to subscribe. Not that I particularly care about your numbers, but it would save me the tedium of having to explain basic concepts to fresh hordes of the willfully ignorant every time. And finally, if you have something intelligent to contribute a concept I realize may be foreign to some of you, you may leave a comment below. I might respond if I feel like. Until next time, try not to let your brains atrophy completely. The world has quite enough mindless drones already. Class dismissed.